Hello, students. Today I am going to explain a poem that is Mr. Nobody. But before going to explain the poem Mr. Nobody, let us try to understand the theme of the poem. The poem is about a child, probably of 3 to 5 years old, who does all the mischief but never accepts his faults as he fears of being beaten or scolded. So the poem is mainly about a child. Now let us try to understand the meaning of the poem. The poem has four stanzas and each stanza consists of 8 lines. Now see the lines. I know a funny little man, as white as a mouse, who does the mischief that is done in everybody's house. So, by these four lines, the poet means to say that he knows a funny little man who is as white as a mouse, and he is considered responsible for every mischief that is done in everybody's house. Here, a funny little man refers to a little boy, probably of 3 to 5 years old, and that boy, little boy, is considered or is responsible for all the mischief that is done in the house. But since he is not caught, the blame goes to Mr. Nobody. Now, see the next four lines. There is no one ever sees his face, and yet we all agree that every plate we break was cracked by Mr. Nobody. The here poet wants to say that neither he nor anyone has seen him, yet we all agree that the plates we break was already cracked by Mr. Nobody. So the poet wants to say that the child is not caught anytime, and hence the all the blame goes to Mr. Nobody. Now see the next stanza, the second stanza. The second stanza is like this way. It is he who always tears out books, who lifts the door ajar, he pulls the buttons from our sets and scatters pins afar. Now by these four lines of the second stanza, the poet again points out some acts of mischief done by Mr. Nobody. Now, the poet says that it is Mr. Nobody who tears out books, lifts the door open, pull the, pulls the buttons from their shirts, scatters pins on the floor. So, these are the mischievous activities done by Mr. Nobody or the little child. Now, see the next four lines. That squeaking door will always squeak for breath. Don't you see? We leave the oiling to be done by Mr. Nobody. Now, the here poet says that the squeaking door continues to squeak as the task of oiling of the door is left to be done by Mr. Nobody, and that's why the door continues to squeak. So, again, it is not seen by anybody that Mr. Nobody hasn't completed his job, and that's why the blame goes to Mr. Nobody. Now, see the third stanza. He puts damp wood upon the fire that kettles cannot boil. His are the feet that bring in mud and all the carpets soil. Now, in this stanza, which is the third stanza, the poet again mentions some acts of mischief done by Mr. Nobody. Here, the poet says that the little child who is below 5 years old puts damp wood or wet wood upon the fire, and that makes the water present in the kettle, okay, that makes or that prevents water present in the kettle from boiling, means that does not let the water present in the kettle boil when the little child puts damp wood or wet wood on the fire. And whenever the little child brings his muddy feet into the house, it makes the carpets dirty. Now see the next four lines. The paper always are mislaid. Who had them last but he? There is no one tosses them about but Mr. Nobody. Again here one mistake is shown, that is done by Mr. Nobody or the little child. Here the poet says that it is Mr. Nobody who is also responsible for misplacement of the morning newspaper, but since it is not noticed by anybody, again the blame goes to Mr. Nobody. Now see the last stanza of the poem. This stanza has also 8 lines. Now the stanza or the last stanza is like this way. The finger marks upon the door by none of us are made. We never leave the blinds unclosed to let the curtains fade. By these 4 lines, which is given in the last stanza, uh, the poet wants to say that the he is responsible, means Mr. Nobody is responsible for making finger marks on the door, and he also leaves the blinds of the window unclosed or open, and that allows the discoloration of the curtains. So here again in the last stanza, the poet mentions some acts of mischief that is done by Mr. Nobody or the little child. Finger marks on the door, okay, and he also leaves the blinds of the windows unclosed, and which results in the discoloration of the curtains. Now see the next 4 lines of the last stanza or the fourth stanza. The ink we never spill, the boots that lying round you see are not our boots, they all belong to Mr. Nobody. Here also the poet says that the boots lying on the ground are out of place, and Mr. Nobody is also responsible for spilling of ink. So, spilling of ink and the misplacement of boots at other place or from the proper place, for both these activities, only Mr. Nobody is responsible. But since he is not caught, he is never caught, all the blames goes to Mr. Nobody. So this is all about Mr. Nobody poem. I hope you have understood the poem. So in the next session we will meet with another poem. Thanks.